So good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here to open with us the new webinar series at IngoC, Unlocking Cognitive Potential Through Neuroplasticity. And I'm delighted to welcome Debbie Gilmore. Debbie, speaking with us today, she is the Executive Director of the Arrowsmith Program. Now, I think many of you will find extremely interesting that before Debbie joined Arrowsmith, she was a leader in learning diversity. So she was the head of diverse learning needs in Sydney, in Australia, which encompasses a group of over 100 schools. And to put the perspective here on Australia, this is the largest education system in Australia outside governmental schools. And I would like you to join me in welcoming Debbie. She's speaking from Toronto, so it's very early morning there. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And please let me know if there is anything you are unsure of, if you want me to repeat something. The chat is working, so I'm very happy to take a look at that as we go. Just be aware, bear with me, and I'm going to share my screen. Of course, I live in Toronto, and though I have an Australian accent, so hope you can understand me. And it's, as I said, it's really lovely. Is everyone able to see my screen now?
Nearly there. You are sharing, but he hasn't entered. Yes, it is.
Yes, great, fantastic. So as Sarah mentioned, this is the presentation we're doing today on attention and addressing ADHD. And can I thank you for sending in the reasons why this webinar attracted you. It really helps us curate actually the presentation. And please add your questions in the chat as we go through. There will be a question section at the end. Okay. There we are. Here's the webinar series that Sarah talked about. We have a couple of others coming up during May. So we hope that you can join us with that. And as Sarah said, that she will let you know when those are on. This is what we hope to cover today, focusing on the brain first. And then its role in attention. So that's what I hope to cover. So let's get stuck into that. And as you know, our brain is so important in our lives. It's our most important asset. And the good news is that just as our brains shape up us, we actually have the capacity to shape our own brains. And also, as you know, the brain is behind every task we do. Anything that is simple to complex, our brain is responsible for that. And we quite often don't think about that as we go through our daily lives. When we do simple tasks, you know, making a cup of tea, for example, do you ever think that how much of our brain is being used to make that cup of tea? We really just take it for granted. But sometimes it's really good to reflect on that. And that's what you're doing today. You're reflecting on that. Also, the good news is that our brain is plastic, and we have the ability to use neuroplasticity to our advantage. Neuroplasticity, for those that may not be aware of a definition, this is one: the brain's ability to change both its physical structure and its functional organization. And that's done through neuroplastic principles, which I've listed there. I'm not going to go through those today, but we can provide information on that if you want to know more. The other thing to remember is that neuroplasticity is neutral. So it's a kind of a neutral concept. It's neither good nor bad, which is good in some ways and maybe not so good in other ways. But the thing is, we have control over the neuroplasticity in our brain. Anything we learn is using neuroplasticity. Plasticity is inevitable. And I think this last point that I have here is actually really important, and I'm going to come back to it later in my presentation. that the brain adapts to what it does most. And this is actually a really important concept when we look at attention. We have multiple functions in our brain, our cognitive functions, and these are a region of the brain or a network of regions which come together to perform a specific job. So just like I was talking before, anything from making a cup of tea, putting your shoes on, or doing really complex tasks at work, our brain is using various cognitive functions of the brain, bringing them together to complete those tasks. Now, we all have these functions working on a continuum. We are not all in one area. Not all of our functions are in one area on this curriculum. Some are superior, some are at average, some could be really, really underperforming. You know, when you are hitting a cognitive function that is underperforming, when something is just that slightly difficult for you to do, the combination of those functions, there's one in there that's probably underperforming. And it's always good to remember that. And as I said, we all have unique cognitive profiles. On the screen now, you'll see some cognitive functions there and what they're responsible for. Anything from auditory memory, motor patterns when we're reading and writing, visual memory. There's different visual memories, the ones for objects or people or faces versus the visual memory for symbols, which we need, of course, for reading and writing and mathematics, chemical equations, etc. We have a lot of symbols in our lives. And then, of course, there's cognitive functions that are responsible for reading nonverbal cues or our planning and organizing and understanding relationships. That's also really probably one of the most important functions that we have. We have at Arrowsmith, we have names for these. This is not an exam. You don't need to remember these. And remember that you're going to get a recording of this, so it's not important that you remember. And as I mentioned, we all have these unique cognitive profiles. Adults, children, seniors, we all have those unique cognitive profiles. So now I'm just going to go and I'm going to talk a little bit about attention. So what is attention? Well, the prefrontal cortex of our brain is like the CEO of attention. Attention is about staying on topic in a conversation or in a piece of work that we are writing and focusing. It helps self-direction. It is about mental initiative. Attention is required in goal setting, execution of tasks, and achieving goals. And it is absolutely required in independence. What you'll see here are 4 networks of the brain. And these are really important as we execute tasks and in particular attention. So you have the default mode network, which is the network that helps us say, you know, I'm thinking. The dorsal attention network says, what's going on? I'm thinking, but what's going on in that? And then the salience network helps us with determine what is important. And the frontoparietal executive control network helps us with how should I respond? So all of this is happening in our brain, and this is some brain imaging that has been found in Arrowsmith students. And those Arrowsmith, the researchers that were looking at students who were participating in Arrowsmith, they saw stronger connections within particular networks as well as between these networks after a period of time in doing one of our cognitive exercises. But it's really important. These networks are so critically important. They need to be at a really strong level or performing either at average or above so that our life is easier. So if a network supporting a brain function is repeatedly stimulated through practice and training, it'll become stronger, contributing to the optimization of that brain function. That's neuroplasticity at work. We like to look under a label or under a concept. And so what I'm going to do now is have a look at the cognitive functions that Arrowsmith can work on that are linked with attention. Now, these are the cognitive functions, as I said, that we can work with, and though not all of the cognitive functions of the brain, but they are really critical cognitive functions. Attention needs these two cognitive functions working well: symbolic thinking and nonverbal thinking. And they are the functions that are critically important. That's the symbolic thinking is in the executive control area in the prefrontal cortex, and that's planning and problem solving in language. Nonverbal thinking happens in the right prefrontal cortex, and that is about planning and problem solving in non-language and in non-language tasks. So let's have a look a little bit further into that. So nonverbal thinking is responsible for accurately perceiving and interpreting nonverbal information necessary for effectively navigating social interactions. It also helps in impulsivity and taking everything into account before acting. Symbolic thinking is responsible for thinking, planning, problem solving, goal setting, task execution, maintaining attention on the task at hand until a solution is found. So these areas of responsibility are happening depending on the task, or are occurring and depending on the task that we're trying to do. I am going to take a little bit of a sidestep in this webinar because I want to look at attention span. Many people talk about attention in the same way as attention span. So I want to separate it a little bit because it can be a little different. Here are some graphs of attention span over the last little while. So we can see the average attention span has been decreasing here from, you can see on the left-hand side, since 2000. There's another piece of data about average screen attention span. So this is the one that makes me a little more concerned. And so have a look at that 2004 point in screen attention span, and then moving in those other couple of years. I probably don't need to remind you what happened in 2004. That's when Facebook was presented to the world. So I am going to come back to that in a minute. But I really did want to separate these two concepts and two different attention spans. So about attention span, it's a continuous stream of digital stimulation. What happens is our brain is wired for skimming and quickly switching. This is that screen attention that I was talking about in that data. So what we train our brains to do, remember, the brain will adapt to what it does most. So when we skim and flick over and over and over again, we train our brain to do that. However, this is not everything we do on screens. So it's not the screen that is negative here. What it is what we're doing on the screen. So I want to be really clear about that. It's not screens that are causing this problem or this inattention. It is what we're doing on the screens. The concept of the brain will adapt to what it does most. All right, so that's a really important feature. So let's get to the next slide here. Again, we have control. We can do something about it. We can strengthen attention. We can strengthen those two cognitive functions, and we can increase our attention span. That's been seen through researchers that have looked at Arrowsmith. Of course, now I'm going to move away from attention span back into attention difficulties. I just wanted to put that little aside there because sometimes it can get confused. So if we have a look at attention, you know, this turns up in classrooms. Many comments as parents or as teachers, as professionals, you would have read these comments on students' report cards, perhaps. But the thing is, it doesn't just happen at school. When school students become employees, that attention difficulties can still show up in the workplace, of course. And then they turn up in life. So really focusing on attention and increasing our capacity to attend is so important. I'm going to introduce another concept here, but I want you to imagine first what it might be like for some students in a classroom where a teacher is talking, maybe they're in a language class, or let's talk about they're in a reading class, but the student finds it difficult to read. But everything that the teacher is giving them as instructions is written. So that reading is quite difficult. Or perhaps there's a difficulty with understanding or comprehension, and the teacher is talking, and the child is trying to focus and process the first instruction. And meanwhile, the teacher has moved on. So the whole series of chatter by the teacher is lost because the child is focused on the first one. Sometimes these children in a classroom show up as inattentive because they can't follow the instructions, or they show up as inattentive because they're disrupting someone next to them to find out what they have to do because they couldn't comprehend the instruction, or they weren't quick enough to comprehend. Or the reading, the child has to read to get the instruction and they can't read properly. So think about what that looks like for a child in a classroom. And we don't only just do this for 1 hour. We do this for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, for 13 years of their life. So it's incredibly challenging for students that find some of this difficult. So I want to bring in this concept of cognitive load. What I just talked about for a child in the classroom, that cognitive load, they may not have difficulties in nonverbal thinking. They may not have difficulties in symbolic thinking. They could just have a number of cognitive functions that are underperforming, which looks like inattention, but it may not be. We don't really know. So a cognitive load, if someone has these weaknesses here, you can see on the screen, if we strengthen that cognitive load is lifted, and then what seemed like inattention disappears, or the behaviors disappear. It's a really important concept and good to separate from attention itself. For a moment, I want to talk about the diagnosis of ADHD. If we think about what I just talked about, that cognitive load or the cognitive functions that I've spoken about, Arrowsmith can address those ones at the bottom of the screen here, the bottom 2 quadrants, where there's multiple cognitive functions underperforming. We can actually, or individuals can actually strengthen those cognitive functions versus those, and also there could be the weaknesses in the left and right prefrontal cortex. So those can also be strengthened. What Arrowsmith cannot address are emotional difficulties that interfere with engagement, or that there is a subcortical challenge and medication may be required. We're not medical experts, but it's out of the realm of Arrowsmith. So I did want to make that clear. If you want to know what's causing attention difficulties, there is a cognitive questionnaire that here's the link there, and Sarah actually has a QR code coming up where you can do a questionnaire and see which cognitive functions are either working very well or underperforming. And then, of course, there is a cognitive assessment that Sarah can also work with you. I want to leave you with this concept of neuroplasticity. Remember this: we have control. The brain adapts to what it does most, and attention can be increased using the principles of neuroplasticity. I'm going to say two more things about Arrowsmith, what it is. It's a cutting-edge evidence-based program. It's been in operation for nearly 50 years. It's backed by science. Science was used to create the program, and researchers continue to research the work. It uses the principles of neuroplasticity inherent in the program. And there's multiple research results showing that the brain works more efficiently and effectively. It's across the world, and as I said, it's been operating for 48 years. Sarah is an Arrowsmith practitioner and can deliver this. Again, I hope you can join my colleague for this, or I for this next webinar. I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, who is going, I'm going to stop sharing, who's going to wind up this session. Thank you very much for your attention, everyone. I didn't see any questions, so please pop in your questions if you've got them there.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I will share my screen so we can talk about next steps. Yes, and yeah, we will be delighted to answer particular questions you have. And Debbie, I wanted to really thank you for bringing that aspect of attention span, because it is so easy to confuse attention span with attention and focus. So very grateful for that development.
Not a problem. It is,
Yes.
it's really interesting. There's a lot of talk about screens right now, so around the world actually. So I do like to just separate it. And yeah, so.
Yes, and I'll remind everyone that we're still recording, so I will tell you a little bit about how we can go about it in practical terms. So my company, IngoC Cognitive Enhancement Center here in Portugal, based in Lisbon, more precisely Barcarena. We operate nationally within this time zone. Currently providing the program at the Oeiras International School. I'm bilingual and deliver the program bilingually within the remit of Arrowsmith. In this classroom where I'm sitting, it's also where we see students here in Barcarena, but we are available to provide a program at other schools and online. So all of that can be discussed with me through contact. And I've got some pictures for you to have an idea of what it looks like. Now, I provide Arrowsmith. My background is in mathematics. I'm a doctor in mathematics, specialized in education and engagement. And Arrowsmith is the next frontier in terms of learning. So when better teaching isn't solving our difficulties, when other ways of engaging students, and I do have quite a lot of experience with engaging people from street environments to university and school. And so this is, to me, the answer to many of the struggles as a teacher and as a lecturer I had, is that how can I support a learner where pedagogy isn't what we need? Now, as Debbie said, if you like to take the free Arrowsmith questionnaire, you can obtain a link on my website, but also taking this QR code, which will be in the recording. My website, it's available here on this other link, my email, and I would like to offer you a free consultation to discuss whether the program is appropriate for the profile of your learner, whether it's a child or an adult, someone you care for, or even students. Any of these questions, please contact me.